Chapter 14. We couldn't leave the dead bull to lay there that close to the cabin. In a few days, the scent of rotten flesh would drive us out. Also, the carcass lay too close to the spring. Ma was afraid it would foul up our drinking water. "We'll have to try and drag it further from the cabin and burn it," I said. "Burn it?" I said in surprise. "Why can't we just leave it for the buzzards and vermin to clean up?" "Because that might spread the sickness. If the vermins eat it, they might get the sickness as well." Ma went to put the harness on Jumper, and I sent Elizabeth to bring me a rope. I doubled the rope and tied it in a loop around the bull's horn, and Ma brought Jumper, who snorted and shied away at the sight of the dead animal. Jumper had smelled deer blood plenty of times, so I guess it was the size of the bull that scared him. Or maybe, like Yeller, Jumper could scent the dead bull's sickness. I had to talk mean and threaten him with a club before we could get him close enough for Ma to hook the single tree over the loop of rope that I tied around the bull's horns. And then the weight of the bull was too much for him. Jumper couldn't drag it. He leaned into his collar and dug in with his hooves, and he grunted and strained, and he pulled till I saw the big muscles of his haunches flatten and start quivering. But the best he could do was slide the bull carcass across the ground about a foot before he gave up. I knew he wasn't throwing off. Jumper was full of a lot of pesky, aggravating mule tricks, but when you called him to move a load, he'd move it or bust something. Well, I called on him again, and I drove him at a different angle from the load, hoping he'd have better luck. He didn't. He threw everything he had into the collar, and all he did was pop a link out of his right trace chain. That flying link whistled past my ear with the speed of a bullet. It would have killed me just as dead as if it hit me. Well, that was it. There was no moving the dead bull now. We could patch up that broken trace chain for pulling an ordinary load, but it would never be strong enough to pull this one, even if Jumper was. I looked at Ma, and she shook her head. "Well, I guess there's nothing we can do but burn it right here. But it's going to take a sight of wood gathering." It did, too. We'd lived there long enough to use up all the dead wood that was close to the cabin. Now Ma and Elizabeth had to go way out in the brush for it. I got a piece of rawhide string and patched up that trace chain, and Ma and Elizabeth used Jumper to drag up big dead logs, and I helped them pile the logs on top of the bull. We piled them up there till we had the carcass completely covered, and then set fire to it. In a little bit, the fire was roaring. Sheets of hot flame shot high into the air. The heat and the stench of burned hair and scorched hide drove us back. It was the biggest fire I'd ever seen. I thought there was a fire enough there to burn 3 bulls, but when it began to die down a couple hours later, the bull's carcass wasn't half burned up. Ma and Elizabeth went back to dragging more wood. It took 2 days and 2 nights to burn up that bull. We worked all day long each day, with Ma and Elizabeth dragging up the wood and me feeding that stinking fire. Then at night we could hardly sleep. That was because all the howling and snarling and fighting of the wolves lured to the place by the scent of the roasting meat. The wolves didn't get any of it, for they were too afraid of hot fire, but that didn't keep them from gathering for miles around and making the night hideous with their howling and snarling. And all night long, both nights, old Yeller crippled back and forth between the fire and the bay cabin, baying savagely, warning the wolves to keep away. Both nights I lay there, watching the eyes of the shifting wolves glowing like live mesquite coals in the firelight, listening to the weak moaning bawl of old Spot still traveling in a circle. I lay there, feeling shivery with a fearful dread that brought up pictures in my mind of Bud Searcy's uncle. I sure wished that Pa would come home. As soon as the job of burning the bull was over, Ma told us we had to do the same for Spot Heifer. That was all Ma said about it, but I could tell by the look in her eyes how much she hated to give up. She had had great hopes of Spot making us a real milk cow, especially after old Yeller had gentled her so fast, but that was all gone now. Ma looked tired and more worried than I think I'd ever seen her. I guess she couldn't help thinking what I was thinking, that if hydrophobia had sickened one of our cows, it might just get them all. I'll do the shooting, I told her, but I'm gonna follow her out a ways from the house to do it, closer to some wood. What about your leg? Ma asked. Leg's getting all right, I told her. I think it'll do it some good to be walked on. Well, just try and kill her on bare ground, Ma cautioned. As dry as it is now, we'd be running a risk of setting the woods afire if there was too much old grass around the place. I waited till Spot circled past the cabin again, and then followed with my gun, keeping a safe distance behind. By now, Spot was so sick and starved I could hardly stand to look at her. She didn't look like a cow. She looked more like the skeleton of one. She was just skin and bones, and she was so weak that she stumbled as she walked. A half-dozen times she went to her knees, and each time I'd think she had taken her last step, but she'd always get up and go on again and keep on bawling. I kept waiting for her to cross a bare patch of ground where it'd be safe to build a fire, but she didn't. I couldn't drive her, of course. She was too crazy mad to be driven anywhere, and I was afraid to mess with her. She might be just like the bull. If I ever let her know I was anywhere about, she might go on fighting. I guess she was about a mile from the cabin before I saw that she was about to cross a dry, sandy wash, something like the one where Yeller and I got mixed up with the hogs. That'd be a good place, I knew. It was pretty far for us to have to come burn her, but there was plenty of dry wood around, and if I could drop her out there in that wide, sandy wash, there'd be no danger of fire getting away from us. I hurried around and got ahead of her, and I hid behind a turkey pear bush on the far side of the wash. But as sick and blind as she was, I think I could have stood out in the broad open without her ever seeing me. I waited till she tried stumbling across the sandy bed of the wash, and then fired and dropped her in the middle of it. I'd used up more of my strength than I knew, following Spot so far from the cabin, and by the time I got back I was dead beat. The sweat was pouring off me and I was trembling all over. Ma took one look at me and told me to get to bed. We'll go start the burning. You stay on that leg any longer, it'll start swelling again. I didn't argue. I knew I was too weak and tired to take another walk that far without rest. So I told Ma where to find Spot and told her to leave little Arliss with me, and watched her and Elizabeth head out, both mounted on Jumper. Ma was carrying a pan full of live coals to start the fire with. At the last minute, Yeller got up off his cowhide. He stood watching them for a minute, like he was trying to make up his mind about something, and then he went trotting after them. He was still thin and rough-looking and crippled pretty badly in one leg, but I figured he knew better than I whether or not he was able to travel, and I didn't bother calling him back. As it turned out, it's a good thing I didn't. Only afterwards I wished 1,000 times that I could have some way looking ahead to what was going to happen. Then I would have done everything I could to keep all of them from going. With little Arliss to look after, I sure didn't mean to drop off to sleep, but I did, and slept till sundown, when suddenly I jerked awake, feeling guilty for leaving him alone so long. I needn't have worried. Little Arliss was right out there in the yard, playing with the speckled pup. They had themselves a game going. Arliss was racing round the cabin, dragging a short piece of frayed rope, and the pup was chasing the rope. Now and then he'd get close enough to pounce on it, and then he'd let out a growl and set teeth into it and try and shake it and hanging on all the time. Generally, he got jerked off his feet and turned a couple somersets, but that didn't seem to bother him. The next time Arliss went racing past, the pup would tie into the rope again. I wondered if he wouldn't get some of his baby teeth jerked out at such rough play, but guessed it wouldn't do much matter. He'd soon be shedding them anyway. I wondered, too, what was keeping Ma and little Elizabeth so long. And then I thought how far it was to where the dead cow lay, and how long it would take for just the two of them to drag up enough wood and get a fire started, figuring they'd be lucky if they got back before dark. I went off to the spring to get a bucket of fresh water and wondered when Pa would come back. Ma had said a couple days ago that it was about that time, and I hoped so. For one thing, I could hardly wait to see what sort of horse Pa had going to bring me, but mainly this hydrophobic plague had me scared. I'd handled things pretty well until that came along. Of course, I'd gotten pretty bad hog cut, but that could have happened to anyone, even a grown man. And I was about to get well on that, but if the sickness got more of our cattle, I wouldn't know what to do. End of chapter 14.